So in this video I'm going to talk about the root cause of suffering, negativity and so-called evil. And I'm going to start with the Buddha's famous definition in his Four Noble Truths, because that's not really accurate, that's not really the deepest cause, but it's a good starting point. And the Buddha famously said that, or claimed that the root cause of suffering is attachment to desires or attachments to outcomes. And that's not really correct or accurate, because obviously something is causing those desires in the first place. He didn't find or diagnose the root cause of suffering in that teaching. And the reason, I believe, is because when he was granted enlightenment is basically a bypassing of the deepest issues. Very few, if any, enlightened teachers, I never heard about any enlightened teachers in history, and I've studied a lot of this, that actually healed the root cause like I did when I went through the eye of the needle experience, which I talk about in many previous videos, which gives me a unique insight and perspective, because I've actually lived through and healed the actual root cause, the deepest root cause of the suffering. So I know have more clarity about this than those enlightened teachers who just bypass the root cause, which most of them, all of them do basically. I mean, some of them don't heal anything almost. Like Ramana Maharshi, he was granted enlightenment when he was 19 years old. Just out of the blue, he was granted a bypass of all his negativity, because everybody was born into this planet having a lot of negativity by default. You can't escape that. But he was just granted a bypass, like so many enlightened teachers who come here. That's why they have a problem describing or explaining clearly what the root cause actually is. And Buddha claimed famously that it was attachment to desires or attachment to outcomes. And it makes sense that he did that, because in his state, when he became enlightened, in that state you don't have any desires anymore, you don't have any attachment to outcomes anymore. So, from his perspective, okay, that must be the root cause, or at least that's going to be an easy explanation to give people. It's going to make sense to people, it's going to work for people, because most people at his time were full of desires and, attachments and to desires and whatnot. It was, the lower you are on the scale, the more you have that. So, and at his time, most people were way below 200. It was like the average levels were way below 200 when Buddha was living, right? And same with Jesus. So it makes total sense why he would make that diagnosis, because for most people, if they could start to let go of those attachments to outcomes and desires, they would be more happy in their life. And so it served his purpose as a teacher pretty well, but it didn't really go to the actual root cause of anything with that teaching. So that's what I'm going to do in this video. And I'm also going to mention, before I get into my insight, is that most modern enlightened teachers these days, many of them actually became enlightened because they were exposed to the Buddha field of Osho. Not all of them, but many of them across the world were part of the Osho community at some point. And his teachings have greatly affected many teachers living today. But either way, most enlightened teachers living today, they always talk about the mind. It's the mind, it's the ego. The ego is in the way, and it's the mind that's in the way, and the mind is the problem. Which is also not really, it's not really wrong. Just like Buddha wasn't really wrong, he just didn't go to the deepest root cause. It's not wrong to say that it's the ego and the mind, but what does the ego even mean? It's just a word. You have to go deeper. You have to define what do you mean by the ego to actually get clarity about it. And saying the word ego all the time and repeating how bad the ego is not really going to help anybody. It's just going to mislead people into believing that they have an enemy that's called the ego, and it's not really, doesn't offer clarity. And that's what you hear from most enlightened teachers these days, and that's what Osho taught a lot. His teaching was all about the ego and transcending the ego and the mind and these things. And it's not wrong, as I said, it's not wrong, it's not incorrect, it's just not accurate, it's just not deep enough to actually get to the root cause. So with that being said, let's get into what I'm going to talk about in this video, which is the actual root cause of suffering and negativity. And we have to start once again, like I've done before many times, with what happens when you're a newborn baby, because that's when the root cause is installed in everybody. And even if you have well-meaning and decent parents and whatnot, and loving parents, at least on the surface they are loving, they still have negativity and whatnot. They still have the root cause installed in them from their childhood, and that's what the baby is exposed to, is the parents' root cause issues and deepest seated negativity. And that negativity, even though the parents are well-meaning and loving on the surface, that the baby will pick up on that negativity, and also from the mass consciousness and whatever people surround the baby and what happens to it in the first 3 years or so. All of that negativity will create the core, or the first separation. The core trauma is from the parents, or the negativity from the parents, most likely, in most cases. And also how we treat babies in hospitals, by ripping them from the arms of the mother and the breast of the mother, and actually placing the babies in plastic isolation coffins, or beds under artificial light. That's probably not a good start on life either. I mean, there has been a lot of science studies about this recently, that putting babies in these incubators, for example, if they're premature babies, like I was, then that actually greatly decreases the chances of survival, which is the opposite of what the doctors taught, because that's what they put them in then in the incubator, is because they think that's going to increase the likelihood of the premature baby surviving. But they found the opposite. The premature babies left with their mothers and nursing with the mother's breast had a much higher chance of surviving, and survived so much more better than the incubator babies, that they had to stop the research because it became so obvious that they were basically killing babies by putting them in the incubators. So obviously that has a major trauma effect, being ripped from the mother as a baby and placed in an isolation plastic coffin, like they do for some reason. Even if you're not premature, they put every baby in these rooms with isolating them in plastic coffins instead of letting them be with the mother. I know I'm now sidetracking a little bit, but I just want to make a point that there is default trauma and default separation being installed no matter what, as long as you're born into this negative mass consciousness and have parents that are negative, have negativity and they're lodged in their mind. It creates the initial separation or split off from your natural self, because it creates a great and massive resistance at the deepest level of your being, a resistance towards life, a no to life, which is a resistance towards your natural self and to life. And it becomes like this filter, or this blockage between, or this resistance between the streaming of your natural self, of your consciousness, and of the life that you are perceiving. And that's just the cornerstone. Then you have like a whole complex, a prison complex, or what you want to call it, built on top of that until you're adult. So that becomes the whole resistance complex in you. But let's focus on the deepest core issues, which often becomes like a cluster of different traumas and whatnot, but it usually creates a single split off from the natural self, unless there is severe and repeated childhood trauma. Then you get what is known as multiple personality disorder, which is basically multiple split-offs or multiple ego cores being split off, and they develop independently. So the person gets multiple personalities when he's an adult. The person is an adult. So that's what happens to the regular people, or default people who are born into this planet, who are not subjected to that kind of severe trauma and repeated trauma. Just regular trauma from the parents and whatnot. They develop what is known as a single personality disorder, which I call it a single personality disorder, which is the same in principle, but it's not as severe. And what you're really dealing with here is actually a psychosis, because you're splitting off from reality. As a baby, you are one with reality. You are merged with the cosmos, with the consciousness, with the universe. There is no separation. The baby doesn't experience itself as separate from anything. And what happens is that the initial trauma is what splits it off, and it becomes a separated individual, or a being that's separated from everything else, or perceives itself to be separated. That's because of the initial trauma and all the trauma built on top of that, and all the layers of protection and negativity built on top of that eventually. But that's the root cause, the first initial separation. And that's basically a psychosis, because what is a psychosis? What is diagnosed as a psychosis by a psychiatrist on this planet? It's when people severely basically divorce reality. They go so far off the consensus reality that they become a danger to themselves and other people potentially. And by splitting off so far from the consensus, they become diagnosed as psychosis. But everybody has this split off to a lesser degree than those who are diagnosed as such. Because to perceive reality, you have to be reality. As long as there is a filter between you and reality, and that filter is your subconscious or unconscious mind, basically full of out of alignment filters built on top of each other. That's what your unconscious mind is. That's what your consciousness is streamed through, and that's what gets reflected back to you as your life, as your destiny. So as long as you have filters between you and reality, then you will be in a psychosis, because you're not perceiving reality as it is. You're perceiving your projections reflected back to you, and that is a psychosis, and as to a certain degree. I mean, the degree varies. The lower you are on the scale of consciousness, the more psychotic you will be, and the more dangerous and destructive you will be also. And the closer you are to non-duality, the more clarity you will have, and the closer you will be, the more filters you remove, the higher you will go on the scale of consciousness. And then if you make the leap into non-duality and beyond, then you will find back to your actual natural self, which means you have become one with reality, and that's the only way to perceive reality as it is, because you no longer have any filters to project onto it. And with no filters, you perceive reality as it is, and that's when you perceive reality as extremely beautiful, because you have become totally clear inside. And that's what they call enlightenment. Everything becomes beautiful and amazing, like you're on acid or on mushrooms, but even better, even more, much more clarity, and not the confusion you have from those drugs, because those drugs are basically melting away all the filters, but it's distorted because the filters are trying to build themselves back up at the same time, like action reaction kind of thing going on. So that's why you have hallucinations and all sorts of weird stuff, and you can have a total clarity on mushrooms and acid for brief moments, or maybe for a little while, but the mind and the filters and the whatnot will try to come back with a vengeance and build themselves back up again as soon as the effect of the drug wears off. So it's a distorted experience of a similar kind of experience you have with non-duality and these things. You can feel, you can sense, you can experience the cosmic oneness, but it will be distorted by all that going on at the same time, all the filters coming back and building themselves up again. So anyways, the point is, to perceive reality, you have to be reality. There cannot be any filters between you and reality, because then you're not perceiving reality as it is, you're perceiving projections. And that's the case with pretty much everybody on this planet at this time, except for those who have been granted enlightenment or achieved enlightenment. And the severity of it is what varies, and that's the only thing that varies, and everything else is basically just a matter of degree. You're still psychotic even at the low levels, even in the 500s, you're still psychotic to a certain degree. And you can actually become very psychotic at those levels, because you still have to face the deep-seated childhood traumas, and they can completely catch you off guard and take you for a pretty wild ride. If you have pretty severe issues like I had, you can completely go haywire and completely go nuts for a good while, because these things are coming up in you and you can't even heal them. If you can't get rid of them, they're basically controlling your life. You're running, it's like a software that's running you, and if you can't debug it, it becomes worse and worse, like it did for me. And so you're never safe from the psychosis or for a psychotic break from reality. You break from reality as a baby already, and you build the whole psychosis of your mind and subconscious mind. with all the filters, and then as an adult you can either live in that psychosis, which becomes your little dream bubble that you project onto everything, and it doesn't take much for many the so-called normal people to get violent in many cases. Slight provocations is enough to trigger this psychosis inside them, and they can become violent. Just like real psychotic people who are diagnosed as such can also become violent. And here's what we have in common: everybody who are in this psychosis, no matter what degree it is, we all hear voices in our head, right? The difference between schizophrenic people who have go on regular psychotic breaks all the time. If they don't take the meds, they can go on psychotic breaks on a regular basis. The medicine basically represses the problem, or makes it not so severe so they can control it. But if they don't take the medicine, they will go into psychotic breaks. And the reason is that they hear these voices that are gaslighting them, trying to maximize fear and paranoia and negativity, and trying to gaslight them onto the negative path and make them do negative stuff and basically serve the collective negative ego. That's what happens to these people. And these voices that the schizophrenics hear were trying to gaslight them and basically paint a false reality for them, always trying to maximize the fear because they are feeding on that fear. That hive mind, the collective negative ego, is feeding on the fear energies of everybody, but especially for schizophrenic. And it's a reason it's called paranoid schizophrenia, because the voices are always trying to milk the fear and maximize the fear so they can use them as a food source. So these schizophrenics are basically like superfood sources for the hive mind or the negative collective ego. And I've had relatives in my family who suffered from schizophrenia, and so I know about these things. And on a regular basis, the voices will go on like a massive, like a piranha style attack, and drain these schizophrenics for all their energy and life force. So they have to take days to come back to normal again. If they get these attacks, which they get on a regular basis from these voices they hear, they will hear like a big choir of voices attacking them at the same time, with extreme negative things like you're worthless and you should kill yourself, and you're just a burden to everyone around you, like a constant nagging with all these things, always exploiting everything that happens in their life to make it look like the worst case scenarios, and always telling that somebody's after them, or the police is their friends are really not their friends, they're enemies, they want to kill you, that they're laughing behind your back, they're plotting behind you, that they're always trying to make them perceive everything as negative and fearful as possible. But that's not only the case for schizophrenics and who go into psychosis on a regular basis. It's also the case for everybody who are caught in this, in the levels between 20 and 640 basically. It's a scale of psychosis in that sense, because everybody hears voices in their head. It's considered normal to hear voices, but you don't hear them the same way as schizophrenics do. They have a much more extreme cases of it. But even regular people or normal people hear the voices in their head, and they many times believe those voices, because the voices will tailor what they say to the situations in the person's life, and they think it's their own thoughts, and that's what the hive mind wants you to think. But we have to remember that to complete clarity is also complete silence. There is no voices, there is no narrative or a narrator in your mind telling you all these things and stories and whatnot. That's actually a sign of a psychosis, just a milder version of it, and then schizophrenics and the real psychotics experience. But it's still the same. The principle is the same. It works the same way. The voices are not as extreme and it's not as extreme negative as they are for the schizophrenics, at least not usually, but they can be, depending on where you are the scale of consciousness. But still, the voices will be more refined and more silent usually the higher you go on the scale. It's like you get more and more refined voices, and they can not as easily drag you down when you have reached a certain level on the scale of consciousness, but they still will always try to insert hooks and manipulate as best as they can and use any situation that arises to drag you down, or even work through other people to attack you. So it's like a full-on attack, especially for people who are trying to go higher than the norm level of the planet. They will really feel this both internally and from other people around them, usually from friends and family actually, because the negative collective ego hive mind will use people around you to try to drag you down, like the crabs in a bucket syndrome, as they call it. If one crab is trying to escape the bucket, the other crabs will drag him down again. That's the same thing with people who are trying to sort of escape up the scale of consciousness, and especially when you come way above the norm level, or you basically change a lot in comparison to your friends. It will be very difficult to have those friends and even family anymore, because they will unconsciously be used as organic portals for this collective negative ego to hold you back and drag you down, which is why you many times have to basically leave your friends and blood relatives behind. In many cases, at least, keep a distance. That's what happened to me, at least, and I know it's the case for many people if you're on the journey up the scale of consciousness. So that's the psychosis is a mass psychosis also. I mean, each individual is at a certain level of psychosis within the scale of consciousness, creating the little bubble of perceived reality, basically living in a fantasy dream world, which is why enlightened people always say that it looks to us from our perspective that people are dreaming. They're in a dream. They're basically sleepwalking around, not really conscious of what is real. And that's how it looks for, if you're very high on a scale of consciousness and you look at people who are very low, you can see that also. If you're like in the 500s, you can look at people in the 200s and you understand what it's meant by it, because they look like they're sleepwalking to you, even though you are still kind of sleepwalking yourself, because you're not fully awake, you're not enlightened yet. But you can still see it to a certain degree. But the point is that the psychosis, is what everybody is living in. It's the dream reality. It's what Buddha called Maya. He called it Maya, or illusion, or ignorance or illusion. That's the same thing. It's just a more scientific and precise explanation of it, if you call it a psychosis, because a psychosis is just a break from reality. You're divorcing consensus reality to such a degree that you become a danger to yourself and other people. That's diagnosed as a psychosis, but everybody becomes psychotic just at the moment they are, in the first years after they're born. They develop that psychosis because they're split off from reality. They're split off from the natural self, so they cannot perceive reality. They will always go around and perceive a dream, and in that dream you will get all these ambitions and desires that give you goals in life that you think is going to fulfill you. You think is going to make you happy. If I can just become famous, or I can just become a famous artist, I can create a masterpiece, or write this literary masterpiece, and everybody will love me, and then I will become happy. Or if I become a famous actor or a singer, or if I can do this and that, if I become rich, if I can get a lot of money, I will be safe and happy. You have all these false ideas and desires, because that's how the mind and the psychosis keep you going in a circle, chasing basically pots of gold at the end of the rainbow. You never get there, and if you get there, you're not really fulfilled anyway, which just happens to all all these famous people who get super famous, and they end up becoming very unfulfilled and unhappy in many cases. They destroy themselves with drug and alcohol use, because it didn't really fulfill them. Because you can't be fulfilled within the psychosis. You can't be fulfilled as long as you're not living in reality, and you're not experiencing yourself as reality itself, which is what sanity basically is. You become the reality that you previously thought you were in, and then you can also perceive reality, because there is no separation, there is no filter between you and reality. You are reality itself. And then you are free from the psychosis, and the only way to do that is to get into the enlightenment levels. But obviously it helps to get into the 500s, which is the best you can do, within the mind, so to speak, within the psychosis. So on a collective level, I mean, all the individual psychosis adds up to our collective psychotic world of craziness and what you see all around you in the world. And basically, the media is like the voices the schizophrenics hear. The media is always trying to gaslight everybody, into perceiving everything as very negative, and also always lying and trying to maximize drama and negativity and fearfulness and paranoia in people. If you look at the media today, especially after Trump, Trump came to the presidency and whatnot, the media and the establishments have gone completely crazy, because they're basically so plugged into and aligned with the collective negative ego that they're representing the psychosis like almost pure, organic portals, just channeling this beast straight through them. And the media acts like, if you have a global collective psychosis, then the media are basically the gaslighting voices that the schizophrenics hear. That's what the media has become. They are so toxic these days. So you have like a battle between that psychotic paradigm that's still, is pretty strong, and then you have all these people who are working up the scale to try to escape or try to, heal. And not only themselves, but also contributing to healing the whole psychotic mass consciousness. And that these two paradigms are now in the middle of a battle, kind of a, splitting apart. And eventually you will find yourself in the reality that you align most with. If you're higher, in the higher end of the scale, above 300 at least, or 330 on the scale, you will be part of the paradigm or the bubble that will eventually get back to sanity. But all those who are below 300 or 330 on the scale will sort of end up in a split reality in which they will be part of a much deeper psychosis and a very negative psychosis if they match and align with those levels themselves. So it's like two bubbles being split apart, and it's gradually happening, and it's been happening for some years now, and it's still going on very much to this day. And so what we are seeing is, with all the craziness, especially you see it on the so-called leftist and progressive side of the political spectrum, these people are really deep in the psychosis. They are usually below 200 or not very much higher than 200 on the scale of consciousness, and they are really very deep in victim mentality and consciousness, and they flip-flop from being a victim to being an abuser. If you see them in these protests and whatnot, they will claim to be a victim if they get caught, and they will knock people in the head with sticks and bike locks and whatnot, and then they feel justified for doing that because they're fighting evil. But they're really just projecting the evil they have in themselves onto the other side. It's very easy to see if you go look at these videos on people who walk from one camp to the other. Like, one person is wearing a Trump t-shirt and he goes over to the leftist protest side, and they all really abusive to him and almost attacking him physically. And then he does the opposite. He takes on a Biden shirt and he goes to the Trump rally. So these people, that side, and they all just laughing and having a good time and joking with him, and there is no aggressiveness, there is no projection in such a negative sense as you get. It's very evident if you see these videos, the split between which side is very negative and which side is more relaxed about it. But the point is that the root cause is the root cause of evil, negativity, and suffering is the psychosis that's created when you're split off from reality because of the traumas that are instilled in early childhood, just right after you're born. Basically, from year 0 to 3, the majority of the early cluster of traumas are installed at those age range. And it happens basically just after you're newborn, the first major trauma and split off. So that you split off from reality, you can't perceive reality, you grow up you get all these protective filters on top of that until you're an adult, and then you have this whole complex of filters in your unconscious mind, and you're streaming reality through that. Your consciousness is streamed through that, and you get reflections back from reality based on that, all those filters. And that's your psychosis, that's the dream world you're living in. And on the macro level, this reflects as a collective psychosis, with the media being the voices that everybody is hearing and trying to gaslight and make everybody as fearful as possible. that's the point. That's how simple it is, really. You're basically all psychotic until you reach back to your natural self, back to enlightenment on non-duality levels. Then you become reality. You become the reality you thought you were in, and you can then perceive reality as it is, because there is no separation between you and reality. And that's, the simplest and most clear explanation of the root cause of negativity and suffering and evil in this world. Because having this psychosis or these childhood traumas, that's what creates a sense of being a victim in everybody, and it also creates a sense of powerlessness. And that sense people will find some way to compensate for, so that many times the whole life will basically be a compensation for that's in a sense of feeling powerless and like a victim. So if you feel like a victim, you might become a bully because you want to prove you're strong, and you're not a victim. You're the opposite. You're a strong abusing person instead. And you perceive that as the being strength, abusing people and being a bully, because then you can prove to yourself that, hey, I'm not a victim. At least I'm a strong bully. So have all these bodybuilder people who spend their whole life growing their body and muscles. And it's all a compensation for feeling powerless inside. And and the same with people who seek to be super rich or famous, or have these obsessions and desires that Buddha talked about. If you have all these obsessions and desires, there's nothing wrong in acting on your highest excitement. That's not the same thing. I'm talking about compulsive desires that not really offer fulfilling anyway. They are rooted in the unworthiness complex, not in what you really actually desire or actually have excited about. That's a different thing. Being excited about something is something that pulls you. It's like a leading star that guides you or pulls you to move ahead in life. But the desires and attachment you have to desires for all these things that you think is going to fulfill you, that's basically propelling you from behind. It's not moving you in a direction, it's pushing you from behind. That's a big difference. And that's the whole thing. I mean, it installs this unworthiness complex in everybody, who basically you feel like you don't have the right to exist deep down. You feel like you don't have the right to exist, and you're not worthy of existence. You're not worthy of love. You're not worthy of anything. You're not worthy of abundance and money, and not worthy of success. That's what this inner negativity, inner trauma, childhood trauma complex creates, this inner unworthiness complex. It creates this sense of being unworthy of everything, and then people have to compensate in all sorts of ways. And if you look at people's life, you will see very quickly that, hey, how is this person compensating? What's their main goal in life? What's their main drive? You can basically see that they're compensating in so many ways, or one way or different ways. It depends. It's individual how that compensation is played out, but everybody is compensating one way or the other as long as you are in the psychosis. But when you find back to enlightenment, you don't need anything like that, because you become powerful in yourself. You become self-fulfilled, so you don't need to compensate. You don't need to have any desires to sort of think that you can overcome that feeling of being unworthy and powerless. That's not needed anymore, because you feel powerful just by existing, and you know that you're worthy just by existing. So that's the big difference. And yes, all right.